Doom is a pretty special game. It wasn't the first game to be in first person and have shooting. Hell, it wasn't even the first by id Software. But it was the one that made the genre what it is. There's a reason that for a little while there, any first-person shooter was labeled a Doom clone, until we had a better term for them. Given its influence, a person unfamiliar with video game culture would probably assume that id Software has iterated on the series a lot. But it hasn't happened that many times. After Doom 1 and 2, the only official content was Final Doom, which is really just a pair of user megawatts dressed up in a pretty black cocktail dress. And one of them was TNT Evolution. Of all the WADs that one could have to pay money for, having to pay for TNT Evolution is a crime. There were other Doom games, including one that's very important to this story, but it hasn't gone back to the Doom well that many times. They've made almost as many Quake games as Doom games. The first time id Software returned to Doom was to create Doom 3. The tech, and especially the lighting in Doom 3 is really impressive, but I'm sorry y'all, as a game Doom 3 is fucking boring. It purports to be more of a horror game, and yet nothing remotely scary actually happens. Horror in Doom 3 just means the room is dark and you move slow and the guns are bad and the monsters attack you from behind. It doesn't have the sauce that classic Doom has, in my view. The next time id came back to Doom was with the release of a game simply called Doom, back in 2016. Can we please, as a species, stop just naming new entries in a series the same thing as the first entry? Baldur's Gate 3 just came out and sold like 10 trillion copies, and I guarantee that most of those people never played the first two. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Just give your games a title, it's fine. Final Fantasy games still do well without having to do ridiculous rebrands. I don't know, having to refer to games or movies by the series title plus a year feels so tacky, especially because on Steam, Doom 2016 gets to be just called Doom, while the original gets stuck with Doom 1993. Like, shouldn't it be the other way around? Whatever. Doom 2016 surprised everyone when it came out. As I recall, and I may be wrong, people came in with low expectations, thinking that it would be like the other shooters of the time period, but were instead delighted to see something new and different. It followed up that success with Doom Eternal 4 years later, releasing it in the hellish month of March 2020. How apropos. I have a lot of feelings about both of these games, so I want to examine both of them, having not played either of them in at least a year and a half before beginning work on this video. I first played Doom 2016 on the Switch of all things. I think I might have gotten it because of a 2-for-1 deal on physical Switch cartridges at one point, but I don't remember what the other game was. I wasn't a big shooter gal in those days, aside from screwing around on Team Fortress 2 and being terrible at it as a teenager, because I had one of the only sets of parents in America that actually paid attention to ESRB ratings for video games. I think part of the reason I picked out Doom was because I was amused by the prospect of a game so violent on a Nintendo platform. Despite the fact that they've had shooters, and indeed even Doom, since the Super Nintendo. I had quite a bit of fun playing the Switch version of Doom 16, although I didn't finish it. As I recall, I quit in the Necropolis. The story is much different with Doom Eternal. I can earnestly say that a part of why I got into the hype for Doom Eternal was the memes about the fact that Animal Crossing New Horizons and Doom Eternal were releasing on the same day. Animal Crossing and Doom Eternal walked so Barbenheimer could run. That joke is already horribly dated when I'm writing this, and it's probably even worse when you're watching this, but whatever. All of my friends were excited for Animal Crossing, but I don't really go for that kind of game, so I intentionally leaned into being the one person in the group excited for Doom instead. I actually pre-purchased it, which is how I also got my hands on the Night Dive remaster of Doom 64. Unlike with the first time I played Doom 16, this game wound up being a huge deal to me, for reasons that I'll get into towards the end of this video. For now, it's important to know because loving Eternal so much is what got me to play classic Doom, and from there I got to Dusk and Blood and Quake and all the other retro FPS games. You don't get the marathon video without me having played Eternal when I did, most likely. I met a lot of the most important people in my life through a common interest in games like Doom and Quake. Shout out to you if you're one of those people. For a long while, I considered Doom Eternal my all-time favorite game. It got me through one of the darkest periods of my life in the pandemic, so naturally it was important to me in those days. These days my fave is Zero Ranger, of course. Perfect game. At some point in the long darkness of the pandemic, I bought the PC version of Doom 16 as well, I played it for a few hours but dropped it very quickly. I found it to be nowhere near as exciting and engrossing as I found Eternal at the time. I quit playing around the third map, concluding that the game was boring in comparison. This is a pattern that I've noticed with these two games. One of these games is ostensibly a direct sequel to the other. It only came out 4 years later, but in my subjective view, I haven't seen any other pair of games that so polarizes the audience between them. Every time I look, I feel like I see someone singing the praises of one of these two games, while simultaneously disparaging the other. Part of the reason I wanted to play these games again now was to investigate this phenomenon. I want to find why I bounced off my second playthrough of Doom 16, why Doom Eternal changed my life, and why a different person might come to the opposite conclusion. I can say now that I've replayed these two games, I appreciate both a lot, but I also understand people's frustration with both. I want to give my fresh impressions of both games, and be a little sappy about it at the end, if you'll permit me. Doom 2016 came right as the era of the military shooter's dominance was coming to a close. It was one of the signs of times changing, although I'd argue that Overwatch releasing the same year, and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and Fortnite releasing the next year, were probably bigger signals of the coming changes. It defies a lot of the trends present in those military shooters, which is why it felt so fresh when it released. Let's get into it. Doom 2016 takes some ideas from classic Doom that had gone by the wayside in the previous 2 decades of FPS design. There's no sprint key, you just have an inherently high movement speed. You never have to reload your weapons either, you can just keep firing until you run out of ammo. Both of these contribute to the frenetic pace. This game wants you to be in perpetual motion. It feels like a bit of a response to the popularity of cover-based shooters back in those days. It's also got some elements from character action games that weren't present in classic Doom. Retro FPS nerds like me often talk about the door problem. The name comes from an article on Game Developer by Liz England, and was later elaborated on for shooters specifically by Andrew Yoder on the same site. I'll link both pieces in the description, I think they're worth reading. Basically, when designing a map for a game like Doom or Quake, you sometimes run into a problem where you fill a room with enemies, but a player will open the door to that room, alert all the enemies, and then retreat out of the room to let the enemies trickle in through the doorway. So the cool room you made doesn't get used, and the monsters get defeated more easily than you anticipated. Mappers have come up with a lot of solutions to the door problem over the years, but Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal sidestep it completely by importing a piece of design from beat-em-ups or character action games like Bayonetta. Frequently, you'll find yourself locked in a room with a bunch of monsters, and not allowed to progress until they're all dealt with. This means you're always in the thick of the fighting. It forces you to inhabit the role of the reboot series' rage-fueled Doom guy. Speaking of inhabiting the role of the reboot series' rage-filled Doom guy, one of the most memorable features of these two games is the glory kills. These are hyper-violent executions of defeated demons, which you'll probably do hundreds of times over the course of a playthrough of one of these games. They also serve a gameplay purpose, because they're your primary means of restoring your health mid-fight in both games. This creates even more incentive to keep pushing forward and come back from the brink. Again, this is a contrast with a lot of the other shooters that were popular at the time. Regenerating health ruled the day back then. There's nothing wrong with regenerating health, but it wouldn't suit the tone that Doom 2016 is going for. In a game with regenerating health, your incentive when you get shot is to flee until you recover. Nothing wrong with that. It works with the higher level of realism that other shooters tend to go for. By contrast though, glory kills force you into the exact opposite mindset. When you're low on health, this game doesn't want you to get scared. It wants you to get angry. Your reaction to being near death is to make something else dead first. To paraphrase another id Software game, you have to get them before they get you. You're gonna have your work cut out for you in that regard, by the way, because the enemies can be brutal in this game. The first you encounter, and the least threatening, are the zombies, but you'll quickly start encountering imps. These aren't classic Doom imps. They move fast as hell and they jump and climb around the arenas. Some of the hardest encounters in this game actually occur early on, when there's 100 imps running around and you don't have that many weapon options yet. The weapons come at a pretty slow clip in this game. You only get one new one per map, as I recall. But that's ultimately not such a big deal, for reasons I'll get into later. Probably the most frequently scary enemy after the early game is the Hell Knight. Unlike in classic, where Hell Knights are just recolored barons of hell with less HP, here they really relentlessly chase you down and beat you to death. They also have a leaping attack that hits a pretty wide area of effect. The Hell Knights are really there in this game to teach you how valuable getting your headshots in is. They can be forced to stagger with sustained headshots, which alleviates some of the pressure of their approach. Headshots are a huge game changer in your ability to survive the early game on high difficulty. The only game I've played that demanded more headshots was Ion Fury, and Doom 2016 has the advantage of not being made by transphobic shitheads like that game was. This game's pretty difficult early on, but by the mid-game the difficulty completely evaporates. The difficulty evaporates due to some weapon upgrades you can get. By far the two best weapons in this game are the Super Shotgun and the Gauss Cannon. At first, they both have drawbacks. The Super Shotgun is slow to reload, though faster than Classic, while the Gauss Cannon has a very slow rate of fire, and when using its Precision Bolt upgrade, you slow to a crawl. These are both well-balanced weapons, before you upgrade them. As you progress in Doom 16, you get weapon upgrade points that add all kinds of bells and whistles to your weapons. However, once you fully upgrade your Gauss Cannon and Super Shotgun, it makes basically every other weapon obsolete. When you fully upgrade your Super Shotgun, it reloads way faster, pierces enemies, and can fire twice before needing to reload. I like to keep this handy for close encounters. My strategy whenever an enemy comes close in the late game is to just circle strafe around them, jump around, and repeatedly apply Super Shotgun until dead. It melts almost everything in the game. When you fully upgrade the Gauss Cannon, you can melt everything from a distance too. Once you upgrade the Precision Bolt, you don't even slow down when using it, so you can explode enemies with headshots from across the map. These two factors pretty much make every other weapon obsolete, to the point where by the time I'd upgraded these two fully, I just started letting my weapon points pile up unused. But on the other hand, I can't fault it too much for that, because those two weapons are so damn fun to use. Let's return to this point later, it's gonna be important. Let's turn our attention to the aesthetic on display here. In contrast to its sequel, Doom 2016 really only has 3 level themes that it iterates on throughout the runtime. For most of the game, you're either in a UAC tech base, on the red sandy surface of Mars, or in Hell. I wish that the color grading wasn't quite so intense in the outdoor sections on Mars, especially because Doom 2016's take on Hell is more darkness and ruins than fire and brimstone. There are some times when Mars looks more like Hell than Hell does. However, the tech bases are where this game really shines. They lend themselves to some very recursive and intricate level design, closer to a real industrial place than we often see in games. These maps often require a lot of backtracking, and there's a good sense of scale to them. Despite how rage-fueled the combat in this game is, the quieter puzzling sections are almost contemplative. The music goes much more ambient as you platform, find keys, and climb walls. It makes you feel like you're only a small piece in something much larger than yourself, which is a good way to look at this game's story. Doom 2016's story is pretty simple. In order to solve an energy crisis on Earth, the UAC is extracting energy from Hell itself in order to keep the planet lit up. In the words of one of history's great philosophers, what could possibly go wrong? An energy source that puts us all at risk of imminent apocalypse, whose makers insist on continuing to use for the sake of profit? I'm sure this doesn't have any real-world parallels whatsoever. Doom 2016's story doesn't hit a whole lot of notes, but one of them, maybe the root of the chord if you will, is satire of late-stage capitalism. This is most typified by the two characters you'll hear the most from during the game, Samuel Hayden and Olivia Pierce. You'll also hear quite a bit from Vega, the AI, but he doesn't contribute much to this theme. He does, however, have a very sexy voice. Upon contacting Doomguy, the first thing Dr. Hayden says is,
"Welcome. I'm Dr. Samuel Hayden. I'm the head of this facility. I think we can work together and resolve this problem in a way that benefits us both."
Even now, Dr. Hayden is out for his own gain, when pretty much everyone in the UIC's Mars base is dead. He too has a sexy voice, though, so there's that. One of the main sources of comic relief in this game is Dr. Hayden instructing Doomguy very carefully how to proceed, and Doomguy proceeding to ignore him because he doesn't care about the production of Argent energy like Sam does. Doomguy is the Chad Wojak blowing up pipelines, while Samuel Hayden is the Soy Wojak pointing at the UAC's declining stock price or some clown shit like that. On the other hand, Olivia Pierce represents the effect that this stage of capitalism has on our minds. The problem with an economic system designed around competition is that in order for it to work, some people have to lose. Olivia is depicted as the ruthless career woman, and the corporate language seen around the UAC speaks in similar terms. In the modern day, bosses expect their employees to give up everything for the job, and wind up being the ones who advance based on their subordinates' labor. As another great philosopher once said, "They just use your mind and you never get the credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it." Essentially, Olivia wants to take the late capitalist expectation that workers will sacrifice for their jobs to its logical endpoint, sacrificing their immortal souls for the advancement of her career. The Codex message from her puts it this way: some of you in a previous life may have held childish notions of God and the kingdom of heaven. This ugly representation of a spiritual nirvana was designed to control you, to placate your natural feelings of hate and rage, to subdue your realization of your place in this universe. By embracing science, you took the first step towards freedom from these intellectual chains. By dedicating yourself to the development of Argent energy, you cemented your place in the next age. Now let us tell you about the real heaven. The real kingdom of the gods is a place that you will never reach, and you should never wish to. No human will ever set foot on the sacred ground of Argent Denur, unless they are made a god by the Dark Lords. Humanity's only purpose and reward is to serve the ascension of the Imperatrix and protect the Crucible. You will be destroyed by the demons, while I will be made a god. My immortality is assured, while you will writhe in perpetual agony at the bottom of the darkest hole in hell. You will be forgotten. Your life, your loved ones, your achievements and failures are nothing. A blank space on the canvas of time. Thank you for your service. May you rot in hell. Olivia Pierce. Olivia is going to win the competition forever by becoming a god, or at least that's what the forces of darkness have told her. The whole anti-capitalist angle makes even more sense in the light of the revelation in Doom Eternal that Argent energy is literally produced by simply being tortured out of human souls in hell. Prosperity in one place being built entirely on suffering elsewhere. Glad that's not happening in real life. For those of you who are only listening to this video and not watching the screen, that was a joke. Capitalism definitely does that IRL. Doomguy is a wrench in the gears of all the horrific shit the UAC is getting up to. He's the only character who sees all of this for what it is. He's seen what happens when you make deals with hell, and the only way out is through overwhelming violence. Part of what makes the cutscenes in this game so much fun is that you can almost bodily feel Doomguy's lack of care for the other characters' self-centered concerns about the future of Argent energy. There's no future on this path, and he's the only one with a clear enough vision to see that. It gives Doomguy's famous anger a tinge of righteous fury. The important thing to remember is that Doomguy gets some independent characterization in this game. He acts in cutscenes without input from the player, meaning unlike classic Doomguy, he has a character to him aside from what the player provides. Doomguy in classic Doom is just you, in the words of John Romero. It's why I play classic Doom with a WAD that makes Doomguy a lady, and I'm such a narcissist that I've considered modding it further to put my own face on the status bar and replace Doomguy's grunts and screams with my own. Other FPSs came in the wake of Doom that similarly had the player be merely a vessel for the player's inputs, most notably Half-Life. One way we can look at this game is that it's arguably a Half-Life-like. For one thing, it's about an individual surviving a science lab being invaded by an overwhelming force from another dimension. However, that's also basically the premise of Doom 1993, so arguably Half-Life is a Doom 1993-like. Half-Life is also famous for having an unbroken first-person narrative. The whole game never leaves Gordon's view, which makes it a really immersive and unique experiment. Doom 2016 almost does this? It's strange. For the most part, we don't leave Doomguy's perspective, and we get some cool character acting, like in the opening scene where Samuel Hayden describes what happened as worth the risk. At this line, Doomguy glances down at the UAC staffer's dead-ass corpse as if to say, "Are you sure about that, buddy?" Doomguy is way more characterized than Gordon Freeman ever was. However, there are times where the game breaks this first-person perspective. Sometimes you get these little cutscenes where a new demon is introduced or Olivia Pierce does something. And yet there are also times when you have Half-Life 2 style cutscenes, where you just stand there with a character talking at you. I really dislike Half-Life 2 cutscenes, and this game already has non-first-person cutscenes. So you may as well actually choreograph these scenes, instead of just forcing me to stand there and listen to Hayden and Vega have a conversation like I'm waiting my turn to enter at a party or something. Doom Eternal dropped the Half-Life gimmick, and I think it was to its benefit. It gives the cutscenes in that game a lot more dynamism than we get here. If I had to describe the overall experience of Doom 2016 in one word, it would be cathartic. Its gameplay prioritizes aggression and movement, primes the player to think like a rage-fueled killing machine. The difficult early game gives way to a back half that's practically a revenge tour through hell, which is exactly what Doomguy is doing story-wise. It's a nice bit of ludonarrative consonance. It's also really cathartic on the written narrative level. Argent energy is self-evidently having disastrous, apocalyptic consequences for the world, a fact that Dr. Hayden is ignoring for the convenience of his business at the UAC. He frames his fear about what Doomguy is doing in terms of how it will be a problem for humanity, but we all know an IRL billionaire or two who claims that they have to keep all the fruits of our labor, for humanity's sake. Hell, they even invented a whole fucking fake school of philosophy to justify it. More like ethical altruism, am I right, ladies? A lot of games wind up landing on a sort of hand-wringing centrism politically, if not outright conservatism, because they want to appeal to as broad of a market share as possible. It's really nice to see that a major publisher made a game where a character messes with capitalism, even if they had to use metaphor to do it. That's cathartic as hell, if you have similar politics to me. That's why it fascinates me so much that this game ends on such a somber note. After defeating the spider mastermind, Doomguy gets teleported out of hell and confronted by Samuel Hayden. Dr. Hayden takes the crucible from Doomguy and puts him in suspended animation, and implies that he's going to start producing Argent energy again. I think that this is a great resolution to this game's story, because capitalism is much too big for one villain to be the source of it all. So, while Olivia Pierce did need to be defeated, it didn't solve the underlying problem. There's always going to be someone like her. It sets him up as the villain in the future, which, well, but it is a great sequel hook regardless. It's actually a little jarring that Doom Eternal doesn't pick up right here. Speaking of which, Doom Eternal is a different beast than its predecessor, and that's not a bad thing. I think a lot of the negative criticisms of Doom Eternal focus a lot on how different of a beast it is, but being different from its predecessors is value neutral for a work of art. A lot of things have carried over from Doom 2016 here. We still have the high movement speed, the relative linearity, the glory kills, the aggression, but this game prizes aggression even more than its predecessor. In addition to being able to restore lost health with glory kills, using the chainsaw to recover ammo has become a much larger part of this game's loop, since the chainsaw's first pip of fuel recovers on a cooldown. In addition, this game does not feature an infinite ammo fallback weapon like its predecessor. Want more ammo? Chainsaw. Simple as that. This game includes a lot more cooldowns in general, for elements such as the flame belch and the ice and frag grenades. I chalk this up at least partially to the explosion in popularity of hero shooters between 2016 and 2020. The flame belch is also worth mentioning since enemies set aflame with it drop armor pieces. Therefore, you can get all three of the major resources in a Doom game off of enemies in this one. And pretty much every encounter has a steady supply of zombies and imps, referred to in this game as fodder demons. Where Doom 2016 expected you to sometimes have to take a break from killing in order to grab ammo or armor, Doom Eternal intensifies its gameplay loop even further by making killing and gathering resources almost entirely the same activity. It makes it a much more demanding game than Doom 2016, but once you're comfortable with it, it feels really good to achieve a flow state where you're constantly thinking, moving, and killing. One of the negative critiques of Doom Eternal that I hear quite often is that the game is prescriptive. On the surface, this seems true. When a new demon type is introduced in the campaign, the game will stop to give you a quick tutorial and a strategy to fight it, including its weak point if it has one. For example, you can shoot off an Arachnotron's tail cannon or the Mangubus's arm cannons, and shooting a grenade into the mouth of a cacodemon instantly puts it into a stagger state. I've heard a lot of complaints that this system obstructs player freedom, but think back to how little creativity I showed in Doom 2016. I wound up using 2 weapons for pretty much the entire back half of the game. I see the strategies that the game presents to you as designed to help you get through the early game until you have more equipment, at least until the Ancient Gods. It allows for greater demon variety in the early encounters. Doom 2016 takes forever to throw anything but imps and zombie men at you by comparison. Once I acquired the rocket launcher, it became my primary tool for dealing with arachnotrons and mancubi. No need to deal with those weak spots from before. Meanwhile, the cacodemon weakness remains relevant for times when you let a cacodemon get too close, so that it's not safe to use the ballista on it. A lot of demons also are just particularly susceptible to particular weapons, such as the plasma gun being even more helpful against shield guys than it was in 2016, the chain gun being effective against hell nobles, or pinkies being susceptible to a well-timed blood punch. I'm gonna name a use for every weapon in the game really quickly. The ballista is really good against flying enemies. The assault cannon makes short work of the maker drones that you come across on Urdak. The combat shotgun is really useful for putting fodder into a glory killable state, or for neutralizing close-up cacodemons like I said. The super shotty is reliable as ever. The chain gun chops through hell nobles and any target that's large and slow, like Cyber Demon. The rocket launcher is practically made for mancubi. The plasma gun cuts through the Doom Hunter's armor. I don't see this as a problem, since it keeps more elements of the arsenal relevant as the game goes on. I used almost every weapon in the course of fighting the Icon of Sin, which I definitely can't say about the late game of the last one. A lot of the changes in general serve to complicate the game in comparison to 2016, which I don't see as necessarily positive or negative. In fact, I really see it as positive. The way I played Doom 2016 is like the way I played Pokemon as a little kid, where I just overleveled my starter Pokemon instead of training up a team. The low difficulty of Pokemon makes it actually pretty feasible to play that way. However, it's also fun to make a balanced team that can counter any situation. I don't see why enemies being susceptible to particular weapons makes the game prescriptive. For one thing, you don't have to use a particular weapon on its respective demon for it to work. What it does do is raise the skill ceiling and give the game a little bit more depth in comparison to the previous entry. I really enjoy both games' gameplay loops, but I recognize that they're different from one another, and that's okay. Speaking of changes to the gameplay loop, there are a lot of new demons in this game. This game makes them much more of a threat as well. Some of the demons like the Whiplash or the Bloodmaker can slow your movement to a crawl if you let them get a solid hit on you, which can be disastrous in a game as fast-paced as this. It might seem unfair or annoying, but it helps focus the loop of combat by giving you super high priorities to go after. It might sound counterintuitive, but it's really healthy for a game to have a few enemies that are annoying. An annoying or difficult enemy will keep the player engaged when otherwise the game might get repetitive. Think of how much less sauce Classic Doom would have if there were no chain gunners or archviles, or how Quake would suffer without the Shambler. I feel that one of the flaws in Doom 2016 is that there aren't any enemies in the game that make the player go, "Oh shit, I have to deal with this immediately," when they spawn in. The Summoner comes close, but she's too fragile to make the player really sweat that much. On the other hand, Doom Eternal has the aforementioned Whiplash and Bloodmaker, but there are also Cyber Demons mixed in with the normal enemy population now, even though the game calls them Tyrants instead of Cyber Demons for some inscrutable reason. The Archvile, my precious baby Flame Boy, is also back, and he's just as obnoxious as he was in Classic Doom, but in a new way. Here he teleports all around the arena when threatened, and he spawns in extra monsters if you leave him unbothered. He's a huge priority target, and I usually use the Crucible on him if I have it available. However, no monster in Doom Eternal has a higher priority than the infamous Marauder. I fucking love the Marauder. Fighting him is one of my favorite things in this game. He forces the player to use a lot of the muscles that they might not be expecting to use while playing a first-person shooter. He carries an impenetrable shield, so you can't just fill him with lead, for starters. If you get too close to him, he'll hit you with his super shotgun for a bunch of damage, and if you're too far away, he summons his Ghost Wolf, which slows you down, making it another thing to have to worry about. You have to keep just the right distance from him and he'll try to swing his axe, dropping his guard. How often does a shooter make you play footsies with an enemy? It rules. The dopamine rush I get from timing my counterattack right, and opening the Marauder up to be damaged reminds me a lot of Nintendo's Punch-Out series, right down to the enemy getting dizzy. The Marauder is definitely this game's #1 drop-everything-to-deal-with-it enemy, and I think he's a big part of the reason this game added the extra life system to alleviate the amount of retries you have to do. It's one of the many collectibles all over this game's maps. Doom Eternal is one of the first ever hybrids of collectathon platformer and first-person shooter, and I'm only half joking. I need to interrupt my analysis for a minute to do some different analysis. Secretly, Doom Eternal is the best Nintendo 64 game ever released for PC and 8th generation home consoles. Think about it for a second. It's got a really saturated color palette in comparison to the last one. features extra lives and platforming as primary mechanics, and, most critical of all, it has a lot of collectibles, some of which can be used to unlock doors to further collectibles, which is about the most Nintendo 64-ass thing I've ever seen. It's not quite a true collectathon, since you don't have to collect things just to progress, but only to unlock stuff. But let's not get too deep into the taxonomical weeds, okay? The point is, it adds a dash of Nintendo 64 spice to the proceedings. This all makes sense since this game has a lot of love and acknowledgement for Doom 64, as do I. As someone with a deep love for the N64 in general, it makes me more susceptible to this game's charms than other people, I suppose. In addition to the greater enemy variety and aggression, this game's also got more options for the player. You gain access to a dash fairly early on that allows you to move beyond your basic running speed. It makes traversal in 2016 feel sluggish by comparison. The game gets even faster once you get the Super Shotgun. In this game, the Super Shotgun has a hook on the front of it that you can use to pull yourself towards enemies, letting you fly around the combat arenas. You can use it to rapidly close the distance with an enemy you want to fight in close quarters, or you can hook yourself to a fodder demon and shoot it while the hook is still attached to fling yourself around the arena. Once you start using the meat hook a lot, this game feels really fun to move around in. It gets even better when you complete the Mastery Challenge for the Super Shotgun, since it lights the meat hook on fire. Now, in addition to providing another movement option, it also replenishes your resources. The meat hook is practically the whole game in miniature. Doom Eternal is also nice because it's generally much lighter in tone than its predecessor. The aforementioned brighter color palette is a big part of that, but there's other things too. The soundscape is much sillier. When you shoot a grenade in a cacodemon's mouth, they make a cartoony gulping sound. When you kill a small fry demon with a headshot, it makes a bottle uncorking sound. I like this touch because this game is even more ridiculously violent than its predecessor. Doomguy now has a little blade attached to his armor, which leads to a lot more variety and gore to the glory kills. They're also just generally more creative and visceral, particularly on the demons that have been added to the roster in this game. Of particular note are some of the glory kills on monsters like the Whiplash, the Prowler, and the infamous Marauder. These extra visceral glory kills are balanced out by the cartoony visuals and sound design, so that the game's violence never trends towards disturbing, instead towards Evil Dead 2-esque black comedy. And if there's one thing you need to know about your gal Juliet, it's that she loves Evil Dead 2. In fact, comparing Doom 2016 to Evil Dead 1, and this game to Evil Dead 2 is a pretty good metric for describing the tones of their stories in general. This game almost feels like another reboot, since it doesn't actually pick up on the cliffhanger that Doom 2016 left behind, except in the very broadest sense. Now Doomguy has the Fortress of Doom, which he uses as his home base as the demons invade Earth. The outbreak from the last game has spread to a full-scale invasion of Earth that Doomguy sets out to stop, making this game as much of a soft reboot of Doom 2 as the first game was of Doom 1. The first map in Eternal is even called Hell on Earth. The invasion is being directed by a new character, the Khan Maker. She's voiced by the same person who plays Asajj Ventress, which is a bit distracting because I had just finished rewatching the Clone Wars while making this video. From her, we learn that Urdak, basically Doom Heaven, is using Argent energy from Hell, so the Makers are helping the demons consume Earth to ensure their own survival. This is a really interesting twist on the theme presented in the last game, where Dr. Hayden was constantly ranting about how important Argent energy was to humanity's survival. Instead, it's become its downfall. The introduction of the Makers turns the narrative into more of an alien invasion story than it had been previously. Alien invasion stories play off of a fear that can only exist now in the modern day. What if something shows up and we're not the absolute rulers of the planet anymore? Or more accurately, what if someone shows up in the global north and starts treating us like we treat the global south? This is named explicitly as far back as War of the Worlds, basically the defining text of alien invasion stories, and somehow manages to be extremely racist to the indigenous people of Tasmania while disparaging the British Empire for its treatment of them. Regardless, his point in writing the book was to say, how would we like it if someone showed up and started treating us like we've treated the Tasmanians? Now Sam Hayden has switched sides, and he's fighting against the invasion, since he's not going to be on top of the food chain anymore. In the last game, he was justifying his exploitation of others as for the good of humanity, but now the Khan Maker has come along to justify the exploitation of all of humanity for the good of Urdak. It's textbook alien invasion. How would you like it if it happened to you? Someday we'll have to talk about Predator in War of the Worlds. That one will be fun. I've seen some fans of Doom 2016 criticize Doom Eternal for not being at all critical of capitalism like its predecessor was subtextually. I disagree. I just see it as having been moved down onto a deeper level of subtext. I've demonstrated that it's ultimately still there if we view the game as an alien invasion narrative. It's just the subtext now. Doomguy spends the whole game fighting through the Khan Maker's minions to get to her, and in the end kills her, wrecking all of Urdak just like he wrecked the UAC facility in the last game. We've got the same refreshing lack of nuance as the last game. Doomguy is right, and he knows he's right. He's a stud, he's ballsy. The villains of this game appeal not only to the idea of the greater good, but also to tradition. On Argent D'Nur, the Knight Sentinels repeatedly admonish Doomguy not to kill the Hell Priests, since they're of Sentinel blood. However, remember that the Makers have been involved in Sentinel society for a while, and probably made this rule themselves to stop any Sentinel from challenging the rule of Urdak. Doomguy sees through tradition and excuses, because he knows he's doing the right thing and he pursues it single-mindedly. In a medium saturated with wishy-washy, limp attempts at nuance, it's really cathartic to play a character who knows what he's doing is right and never feels any doubt about it. Even all through the way to the end of the DLC, where Doomguy makes it his mission to kill God and Satan, he never sways once from his course. Does he have anything to say? No. There is one story decision in this game that truly baffles me, however. Midway through the game, we get a reveal that Doomguy stumbled into Argent D'Nur after spending years fighting demons in Hell. One of the future Hell Priests holds up the helmet they found him wearing, and it's the helmet from classic Doom. In addition, in the Night Dive remaster of Doom 64 that was packaged with this game, the ending of the new map set implies a tie-in to Doom 2016. Therefore, Doomguy was actually the same Doomguy as the original Doomguy the entire time. There's nothing wrong with this decision in and of itself, but I find it kind of odd. The Codex in Doom 2016 made references to a character called the Betrayer, and a lot of people believe this was Doomguy before he was, well, Doomguy. The Betrayer made a deal with the demons to save the life of his son, but Hell betrayed his trust and used his son to create the icon of sin. A lot of people assumed before the release of Eternal that this was why Doomguy was so pissed off at the forces of Hell. He'd been wronged severely by them. Doomguy is even said to have been wronged in the very first Slayer's Testament. However, in Eternal, the Betrayer appears, and he's actually just some other Night Sentinel from Argent D'Nur. He even gets a little redemption arc over the course of the DLC. I feel like this is one of the last changes they made to the story. Let me explain why. Partway through the campaign, the Khan Maker offers to restore what Doomguy lost if he gave up on his quest. If Doomguy was the Betrayer, this would be a tempting offer, since it would be the return of his son. But now, without any idea what the wrong Doomguy suffered at the hands of Hell was, we're forced to conclude that the Khan Maker is offering to resurrect Doomguy's pet bunny Daisy. While this is very funny, it does undercut the dramatic tension a little bit. In general, I think it would have been better to keep classic Doom separate from the reboot duology. While he doesn't say much for himself, Doomguy in the reboot still has a character aside from your inputs. He acts for himself in cutscenes regularly, especially in Doom Eternal. In classic Doom, Doomguy is you. My dad, John Romero, said so, and I trust him. It's why I play with a mod that makes Doomguy a lady, like I said. I just find it a little odd that there's now this tension. I always have to think, is Doomguy me or himself? I think it would have been okay to have Doomguy and the Doomslayer TM be separate characters. On the whole, though, I still like the writing in this game. It's much cheesier than its predecessor, with a lot of jargon and saturation and goofy sound effects. But I've learned not to take myself so seriously that I can't also enjoy that kind of tone. I applaud the singular focus of Doom 2016, and I applaud the reckless abandon and variety of Doom Eternal. They're very different flavors from each other, but I think if you don't bite into one expecting the taste of the other, you can learn to appreciate both. Like I said, a big part of the reason I made this video was to learn to appreciate Doom 2016 more, since I used to be an Eternal enjoyer exclusively. But now I really like both of these games. I still do prefer Eternal, but that's more out of sentiment. Sentiment is good though! Sentiment is what makes us human. If you like one of these games and not the other, I humbly suggest giving your less preferred game another chance with an open mind. If you'll permit me to speak off the cuff for a minute, I'm gonna go unscripted here, which is not something I normally do, but this video felt a little bit incomplete without this discussion. Like I said at the top of the video, Doom Eternal was really what got me through the pandemic. Without it, I would have suffered a lot more than I did. And I suffered a lot. I was an extrovert who hated her job and was in the wrong gender at the time, so you can understand why the pandemic was completely miserable for me. I was lucky to have a job, but sometimes the wrong job for you, is not going to work out anyway. When I was playing Doom Eternal in those days, everything felt like it melted away because I had to focus so intently on the game. It was the perfect distraction for me at the time. Really, the reason I bounced off of Doom 2016 and not Eternal was that it does require your attention more. So, really, when it comes down to it, my reasons are sentimental and I came up with intellectual reasons for them later. But now, I can appreciate both of them for what they are. So, think about what sentiment makes you prefer one to the other, and really interrogate that. I think it's interesting to look at. That's all for today. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of this video. I'm sorry the delay was so long after the Time Spinner one, but it is what it is. If you want to help out, you can subscribe and share this video. I'd really like to share my work with more people, so I'd really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Ciao.